Hey guys, happy Monday. It is, man, it's almost 7 o'clock, Monday afternoon. So, yeah, want to make it short and sweet here. Going to talk about fishing lines. I've got quite a few that I've kind of put together for this video. Some of the stuff that I use, you know, and just kind of want to give like a good quick overview of what I think about fishing lines and when I would use which type, et cetera, et cetera. So let's just start with, yeah, we got a couple of braided lines. Let's just start with some braid. So what do I use braid for? That's the first question. I use braid anytime I'm fishing in, heavy cover, really heavy cover, or stained water, and I want to increase my sensitivity. So if I'm flipping maybe in, a lake like Falcon Lake, for example, where there's a lot more color in the water, and it's not as good as a chance of the fish seeing the line, flipping trees, stuff like that. I'll also use the braided line for frogging. If I'm throwing a frog in like, lily pads, something like that. Trying to think, I use braid a lot for my spinning rod. What I like to do basically with the spinning rod is I put the majority of the line on there as a braid, and then I tie a leader that's maybe 7-8 foot long. And what that allows me to do is basically have a lot more sensitivity, have a little less stretch in my line, but I still have the I still have the line is clear, and so the fish can't see it. Um, but yeah, I mean it's a couple different brands that I use. For example, I've used like one of the really popular brands is Power Pro. Um, you know, so I used to use that a lot. Now I use just kind of I try different ones. So like this is a Spider Wire Stealth. This happens to be 65 pound test, so that's something I would like flip with in heavy cover. Um, this is Suffix. So this is a 30 pound line. It's got an 8 pound mono equivalent. And so that tells me that the diameter is such that when I tie a line to line knot and I'm creating my leader for my spinning setup, I'll use 8 pound mono to tie to this so that it's balanced. Um, so I like this Suffix. It's pretty good. This has 8 braided fibers. This is one of the important things about braided line is you want to know how many fibers there are, because the more that there are, the smoother it casts and the better it handles. So this is 8 braided fibers here. Um, this stealth braid, I don't see the the number of fibers on it, but sometimes it's on there, sometimes it's not. I think at the time I picked this up and just wanted to try it. It feels pretty coarse, so I'd guess maybe it's fewer fibers. The Suffix was really smooth. So that's one of the things, I do like braided line. If I can get away with it, I like to throw it, Just the hook sets, you don't have to set the hook as hard because there's no stretch. So it just, set the hook just a little bit and all that force goes straight to the barb or to the tip of the hook. Um, yeah, so now that I've kind of talked about braid a little bit, let's talk about some of the monos that I use. Um, Now, honestly, one of the best monos that you can use, believe it or not, is Trilene Big Game. And so, it seems like a line that people maybe use a lot for catfishing or, kind of an all-purpose, monofilament. But it's strong and it's cheap and it does the job. It's not super fancy or anything, but it's good enough. So for practice, generally for practice, I'll use like a monofilament. Um, when I'm fishing like a tournament or like something that's really important, and I want a lot more sensitivity, I'll go to like a fluorocarbon or something like that. And using a mono kind of goes hand in hand with using like a copolymer. Um, or so this is called this is a fluorocarbon nylon hybrid here. I think that's like a copolymer. They have like a P line. P line makes a like a fluorocarbon coated line. That's an option. But the whole thing is like there's two benefits from going fluorocarbon versus my mono here that I'm showing you. One of which is the how visible it is, and the other one is the sensitivity. So you're gonna get the better performance out of like a fluorocarbon. But just sticking on the topic of my monofilament, this is like one of the best monofilaments that I've ever used. It's called Maxima Ultra Green, and so it's freaking awesome. There's this program on YouTube called Tactical Bassin, and the guy Matt Allen, this is what he uses a lot for mono, and I wanted to give it a try, and I got it on Tackle Warehouse, but man, you talk about a really soft, supple um, monofilament. This stuff is freaking good. Um, so let's see. I've talked about the braid. Like I said, in terms of the mono, um, big game, like maybe a hybrid line or a copolymer. If I'm really desperate and I'm just trying to fish cheap, I'll use like H2O Express Academy line. It may not be the best, but I've got plenty of good fish on it. If I'm being honest, seems to be just fine. But obviously, like I said, the sensitivity is not great, and the main thing is with these cheap lines, they get a lot of memory. So when you're casting after a while, it'll get harder to cast because it's not as smooth and it just kind of curls up and all that. Or if you leave it on your reel for a while, stuff like that. But you can combat that and fix your problems with like a silicone spray. They sell it at like Home Depot. You just spray your line and it'll kind of make it relax, so to speak. So I do that a lot, if I'm fishing with cheap line or whatever. But it's good. So the other thing is that for the fluorocarbon, which I don't have any in front of me right now, but I use a couple different fluorocarbons. I like the Trilene 100% fluorocarbon. That's a really good one. And I'm talking pure fluorocarbon, not a copolymer or a blend or anything like that. So pure fluorocarbon. I'll use, like I said, Trilene 100%. Seaguar Red Label is a good entry level fluorocarbon. That's pretty good. Um, what else? Seaguar Tatsu. So there's like the Seaguar Red Label. There's the Seaguar Invisex, and then it goes up to like the Tatsu. The Tatsu is like the top of the line. And when I'm fishing, if I'm fishing a lot, or like I've gone through periods within the last few years where like I'll fish every day, or like close to it, I'll fish with that Tatsu, and I feel so dialed in with the sensitivity, as well as it's like I could just leave it on my rods for like the whole week. Usually I change my line every other time I go out because I fish so much. But I could leave that Tatsu on there. The performance will still be good. It won't get a lot of memory. Um, but yeah, so the Seaguar Tatsu I'd highly recommend. Like I said, the Red Label is a good entry level one. Of course, the Trilene 100%. And that's about it for my fluorocarbons. Trying to think. So another big difference between the fluorocarbons and like the mono or the braid is one floats versus one sinks. And so if I'm fishing a top water and I'm fishing a sinking line like a fluorocarbon, what'll happen is the line will pull the nose of the bait down and it will modify the action in a way that I don't like. So I always want to go with at least a monofilament, if not a braid, with like a top water bait. Um, the other thing is like you need to be mindful of when you're using suspending jerk baits and stuff, which line you select. Um, I mean, it's important. I think don't don't still want to focus on your technique and your action and all that you put on the bait, but I think it does play a role. Using a suspending type line versus a sinking line, suspending or floating line versus sinking. Um, you know, um, There's a lot. I would say like when I really want to get a fast, accurate fall and I'm dock fishing or something, and I want the line to um, sink quickly, not pendulum away from where I'm fishing. You can definitely, the majority of what you do with trying to keep it free falling evenly would be using like the type of weight setup that you're using. But I think line helps. Carolina rigs and stuff. Just I don't know how significant it is, but I do know it's significant to keep be mindful of what line type you're using. So once again, the braid in the mono is going to float generally, and the fluorocarbon is going to sink. The fluorocarbon is going to be more visible, or sorry, the fluorocarbon is going to be less visible. It's going to be more sensitive. It's going to cost more. Um, it's going to have less stretch. The mono is going to um, stretch more. It's going to be less sensitive. It's going to be cheaper. It's good for practice. And of course, the braid has no stretch. Um, it's not going to be cheap generally. I mean, there's various level price points in braided line, but generally speaking, not really going to be cheap. But you get your higher performance, like I was saying, out of like what they call the like an 8 carrier, 10 carrier, like the carrier number or the number of lines that make up the braid. The more, the smoother the line casts. So those are just some things to think about. To wrap this up, maybe talking about what line size I use generally. Just the average rules. On my spinning, I always use 8 pound test. And so if I'm using 8 pound mono with a 8 pound or with a 30 pound braid, like I said, where the diameters are equivalent, that's one thing. But just what I'm talking about is the leader portion. I use 8 pound pretty much all the time. Where we live, there's a lot of trees and stuff, so I don't want to use like 6 pound. If I can get away with it, I use 6 or 4 pound, just because there's less line, and you're gonna get more bites. So like I said, just my go-to 8 pound for that. Flip. Okay, so like my all-purpose like crankbaits or spinnerbait, chatterbait, jig, in light cover. I'll use a like a 15 pound. So that's like my all-purpose. Flipping, I'll generally do like a 20 pound, or I'll go to like 50 pound braids, 60 pound braids, stuff like that. But just basically, I'll go 8 for my spinning, 15 for my all-purpose setups, and like 20 for flipping, and that does. I mean, the majority of what you need is accomplished right there, and most people who know will agree. Just keep it simple, It doesn't have to be complicated, and um, I try to buy quality products. All this stuff is decent. Obviously, if I could get my hands on that Seaguar Tatsu 24/7 and have the highest level of braid and just these different lines, I would. Don't get me wrong, but it's not what I'm getting at is not a super huge difference. Um, you know, Especially when you're thinking about controlling how much you spend on bass fishing. I mean, let's be honest, everybody's got a lot of equipment, a lot of money into equipment, and I'm as serious as it gets, but it doesn't mean I'm going to spend all my money on fishing line. So, anyways, I hope that's helpful. Yeah, good info as always, and stay tuned for more. Thank you.